I found it at the back of my cabinet on a Tuesday morning. A white mug with a small chip on the handle. Nothing special about it. Except it wasn't mine. I stood there in my kitchen, still in my pajamas, hair a mess, coffee maker gurgling behind me. And I held that mug with both hands like it was something fragile. Like if I gripped it too hard, something would break that had already been broken for months. It was hers. Elena had left it the last time she came over. Back when coming over was still something she did. Back when I didn't have to invent reasons to text her. Back when the space between us felt like closeness instead of distance. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the coffee to finish brewing. Long enough for the morning light to shift across the kitchen floor. Long enough to understand that I hadn't thought about her in days, or at least that's what I'd been telling myself, and that this mug, this stupid chipped mug, was about to undo all of that very careful, very deliberate not thinking. I set it down, picked it up again, put it in the cabinet, took it back out. And then I sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around that mug full of my coffee, not hers. And I let myself remember the morning it all started to shift. The morning I spent at her house. The morning she made breakfast. The morning everything I thought I knew about myself quietly, without warning, without my permission, stopped being enough. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Elena and I had been friends for 6 years. 6 years is a long time. Long enough to stop noticing someone. Long enough to take for granted the specific way they laugh at their own jokes before the punchline. Or the fact that they always burn the first piece of toast and never learn from it. Or the way they say your name when they're genuinely happy to see you versus when they're just being polite. I knew all of that about her. Every small, unremarkable thing. We met at work. Both of us hired within the same month at a mid-size marketing firm in Chicago. Both of us assigned to the same floor. Both of us discovering at the same time that the coffee machine on that floor was broken, and the elevator to the floor below took 6 minutes on a good day. We started walking down the stairs together. That was it. That was the whole origin story. No dramatic moment. No feeling of the world shifting beneath me. Just 2 women who needed coffee and figured out that walking down 4 flights of stairs was less boring with someone next to you. She was funny. That was the first thing I noticed. Not performed funny, not trying to impress funny, just genuinely, naturally, quietly hilarious in the way she observed things. She'd make a comment under her breath about something happening across the room, and I'd have to press my lips together to keep from laughing in a meeting. I liked her immediately. I just liked her. The way you like someone who makes a room feel easier to be in. Over the years, the friendship built itself the way those things do. Lunch breaks turned into after-work drinks. After-work drinks turned into weekends. Weekends turned into the kind of closeness where you stop needing a reason to call. Where you just call. She knew things about me that I hadn't planned on telling anyone. She knew that my relationship with my mother was complicated in ways I still didn't have language for. She knew that I sometimes woke up at 3 a.m. with this particular feeling in my chest. Not quite panic, not quite sadness, just a low, persistent hum of something unfinished. She knew that I'd been in 2 long relationships before. Both of them fine, both of them with women I genuinely cared about. Both of them ending quietly, almost without conflict, in a way that should have told me something but didn't. She never analyzed me. That was one of the things I loved about her. She just listened, held the information, let me be confusing without making me feel like a problem to solve. I did the same for her. I knew about her ex, Sophie, who she'd dated for 3 years and who had moved to Portland with someone else without much warning. I knew that Elena took longer to trust people than she let on, that her ease was real but it had a perimeter, and that getting past it was something very few people had managed to do. I thought I knew where I stood. Inside the perimeter. Safely. As her friend. I thought that was the right word for what we were. I thought that for a long time. The weekend at her house started on a Friday evening in late October. Nothing special about the timing. She'd just moved into a new apartment, bigger than her last one, in a neighborhood she'd wanted to live in for years. And she'd been slowly settling in for about 2 months, and I'd been meaning to come see it properly. And we'd kept pushing the date, because life kept getting in the way life does. She texted me Thursday afternoon. "You still want to come this weekend? I finally got the guest room sorted. Bring overnight stuff if you want. We can make a whole thing of it." I said yes without thinking about it, because why would I think about it? It was Elena. It was just Elena. I drove over Friday after work, a bottle of wine in the passenger seat, my overnight bag in the back, already composing in my head the comments I was going to make about her furniture choices, because she had notoriously strong opinions about furniture that I found genuinely entertaining to argue with. She opened the door before I finished knocking. That was the first thing. She opened the door like she'd been listening for me, like she knew the exact sound of my footsteps in the hallway, and she smiled. Not the polite version, not the social version, just the real one, the one that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth. And she said my name. Just my name. Just Claire. And something in me went very, very still. I didn't understand it then. I cataloged it the way I cataloged a lot of things that weekend, as something to examine later, something to file away, something that would probably make sense in the morning. It didn't make sense in the morning. It made much less sense in the morning. I came inside. The apartment was warm and smelled like something cooking, garlic, and something sweet underneath it. She had candles going on the coffee table, which she'd have denied being intentional if I'd pointed it out. Music playing low enough to be more texture than sound. The kind of evening that just feels like care without announcing itself. We ate dinner sitting on her living room floor, because her dining table was still covered in boxes, and neither of us minded. We drank most of the bottle of wine. We talked the way we always talked, jumping between topics, interrupting each other in a rhythm that had its own grammar, laughing at things that wouldn't have been funny to anyone listening in. At some point it was midnight, and neither of us had noticed. She showed me the guest room, genuinely sorted. She hadn't been lying. There were actual sheets on the bed and a lamp that worked, and a little dish on the nightstand with a candle and some lip balm, which I was not going to acknowledge feeling touched by. "You good?" she said from the doorway. "I'm good," I said. She looked at me for a second longer than the question required. "Good," she said, and left. I lay in the dark in her guest room and listened to her moving around in the apartment, the sound of her in the bathroom, the click of lights going off one by one, the quiet of the whole place settling, and I felt, very specifically, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, which was a feeling I didn't know what to do with. So I went to sleep. I woke up before her. That surprised me. Elena was a morning person, reliably, obnoxiously a morning person, the kind who texted you at 7:30 on a Saturday with actual coherent sentences. But that morning I was awake at 6:15, with the particular alertness of someone whose body decided sleep was finished. I lay there for a few minutes listening to the apartment. Still quiet. Low gray light coming through the curtains. The distant sound of the city starting to move. I got up and padded to the kitchen in my socks and found the coffee. She kept it in the same place as always, on the second shelf to the left, which I knew because I'd been in enough of her kitchens over the years to have internalized her organizational logic, and I started a pot. Then I stood at her kitchen window and watched the street below while it brewed. There's something specific about being in someone's space when they're asleep. Something that has nothing to do with them but tells you everything about them. The coffee she bought, the cookbooks on the shelf she'd never fully organize, the small succulent on the windowsill that was, improbably, thriving. A photograph on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a cassette tape, of the two of us at someone's birthday party 3 years ago. Me mid-laugh, head thrown back, and Elena looking at the camera with this expression I couldn't quite read from across the kitchen. I poured my coffee and sat at her kitchen table. I had my phone with me, but I didn't look at it. I just sat there in the quiet and drank my coffee and thought, vaguely and without urgency, about nothing in particular. I heard her before I saw her. Her bedroom door, then her feet on the floor. She wore slippers, the kind with backs that made a soft shuffling sound. And then she appeared in the kitchen doorway with her hair loose and her face soft with sleep and an oversized gray sweatshirt that was clearly doing its best. She saw me and stopped. Just for a second. Less than a second. "You made coffee," she said. "There was coffee," I said. "I used it." She laughed. That small morning voice laugh, lower than her regular laugh, and something about the sound of it hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for, somewhere behind my sternum, like a word in a language I thought I didn't know. She poured herself a mug and came to sit across from me at the table. We didn't talk right away. That was normal for us. She wasn't a person who forced conversation in the morning, and neither was I, and we'd spent enough mornings in each other's company to be comfortable with the quiet. But this quiet felt different. Not charged exactly. More like the air before weather changes. Like the moment right before something. She was looking out the window. I was trying not to look at her. I was looking at her. The light was coming in low and sideways and landing on the side of her face, on the line of her jaw, the curve of her cheekbone. And she had both hands wrapped around her mug the same way I had both hands wrapped around mine. And she looked completely, entirely herself. And I felt something in my chest move in a way that was slow and vast and had no name I wanted to give it. I made myself look at the window. I thought, I'm tired. I'm barely awake. Everything feels more intense in the morning when you're in someone else's house and the light is doing things it doesn't usually do and you haven't had enough coffee. That's all this is. That's all this is. "You sleep okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Really well, actually." She smiled into her mug. The guest room worked." "The guest room worked," I confirmed. She got up to start breakfast. That was just Elena. She cooked when she had someone to cook for, always had, and she moved around her kitchen with the comfortable efficiency of someone at home in their own space, pulling things from the refrigerator, cracking eggs into a bowl, slicing something on the cutting board. I watched her. I was aware that I was watching her. I was aware that I should probably be doing something else, looking at my phone, setting the table, asking if she needed help. And I was doing none of those things. I was just sitting at her kitchen table with my coffee watching her cook breakfast and feeling something warm and slow and quietly unsettling moving through me like a tide coming in. She started telling me about a project she was working on. I was listening. I was also not entirely listening, because a significant portion of my attention was occupied with noticing the way she used her hands when she talked, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear without pausing mid-sentence, the way she glanced over her shoulder at me when she said something she wanted to make sure I was following. Every time she glanced back, I made myself look like I'd been paying attention the whole time. I didn't know why I was doing that. I didn't examine it yet. She made eggs. Scrambled. Which she did better than I'd ever managed, somehow always finding the exact right moment to take them off the heat. And toast. And she cut up fruit in a bowl and put it on the table like it was nothing, like it was just Tuesday, like making breakfast for me was a thing she did all the time. She set a plate in front of me, and then, instead of sitting across from me, she sat beside me. There was nothing unusual about that. We'd eaten next to each other 100 times. But somehow, that morning, the few inches between her shoulder and mine felt like a fact I couldn't unknow. We ate. We talked. The conversation moved the way it always did. Easy, meandering, comfortable. At one point, she said something funny, and I laughed, and she turned to look at me when I laughed, the way she sometimes did. And when she turned to look at me, we were close enough that I could see the specific amber in her eyes. The color I'd never tried to describe before. And she was smiling. And for one strange, suspended second, I could not remember what we'd been talking about. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said. She held my gaze for a half-beat longer than comfortable. Then she looked back at her plate. I drank my coffee. I thought, very quietly, in the back of my mind, where I kept the things I wasn't ready to look at directly. "Oh." And then, louder, on top of it, "No, stop. That's not what this is." But the "oh" had already happened. The "oh" had already happened. And somewhere in me I think I knew that no amount of "no, stop," was going to undo it. Not really. Not anymore. I spent the next 3 hours being a very good friend. I helped her unpack the last few boxes. I debated, with genuine enthusiasm, whether her bookshelf should be organized by color or by genre. And I held my position on color, even though I knew she was right about genre. I made another pot of coffee. I laughed at the right moments and said the right things and acted, to the best of my ability, like a person whose chest had not done something irreversible over breakfast. I drove home in the early afternoon. I was 20 minutes out when I realized I was still thinking about the color of her eyes. Not thinking about it exactly. More like feeling it. The way you feel something that happened to your body before you understand it with your mind. A bruise you didn't notice forming until the moment you press your fingers against it, and something sharp flares up and you think, "Oh, that's been there for a while, hasn't it?" I turned on the radio, turned it off, thought about calling her, just to say I'd gotten on the road fine, which was the kind of text I might normally send, and then didn't. I didn't know why I didn't. I just didn't. I got home, unpacked my overnight bag, put a load of laundry on, made dinner, watched half a show I can't remember now, and went to bed at a reasonable hour, telling myself I was tired, and that everything felt strange because I was tired, and that by morning it would be fine. It would all be normal and fine, and I would call her in the morning, and it would be exactly the way it always was. By morning, it was not fine. By morning, I was lying in my own bed, in my own apartment, thinking about the way she said my name when she opened the door. I didn't tell her. Obviously, I didn't tell her. What would I even have said? "Hey, I think something happened to me at breakfast on Saturday. I don't know what to call it, but it involves your eyes, and the way you make eggs, and the fact that you sat next to me instead of across from me, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since, so." No. Instead, I did what I was good at. I kept things exactly the same from the outside while quietly, methodically dismantling myself from the inside. I texted her Sunday evening. Nothing unusual. I sent a photo of a cookbook I'd seen online that I thought she'd like, and she responded with 3 exclamation points and a voice message that was 47 seconds of her explaining in elaborate detail why she already had that cookbook, but in a different edition, and why the edition mattered. Completely normal. Completely us. I held my phone after the voice message ended and listened to the last few seconds of it again. Her voice. Just her voice, saying ordinary things in her ordinary way. And I sat there on my couch listening to it twice with this expression on my face that I'm grateful no one was around to witness. The next few weeks were an education in how well I could hold 2 things at once. On the surface, everything was fine. We had lunch on a Wednesday. We texted daily, sometimes constantly, the way we always had. We went to a friend's gallery opening together and stood in front of a painting that neither of us understood and whispered increasingly uncharitable theories about it to each other until we had to leave the room to keep from laughing. Underneath, I was paying attention to everything. That was the difference. That was the thing I couldn't turn off once it had turned on. Before, I had noticed Elena the way you notice something you love and take for granted. Warmly, completely, without any particular focus. Now I was noticing her with a specificity that frightened me. The way she held her wine glass, the way she pushed her hair back when she was thinking, the way she always touched her collarbone when she was about to say something she wasn't sure about. This small unconscious gesture, and I had apparently been watching her make it for 6 years without ever truly seeing it until now. I told myself various things. I told myself it was a phase, that I was lonely in a way I hadn't fully acknowledged, and that I was projecting something onto a friendship that didn't deserve to be complicated. I had a history of doing that, of making things harder than they needed to be, of finding the most difficult interpretation of a feeling and choosing to live there. I told myself it would pass. I told myself that what I felt that morning in her kitchen was just the particular quality of an October morning in a warm apartment with someone I genuinely loved as a friend, and that I was romanticizing a completely ordinary domestic scene because I was tired and slightly hungover, and my brain had done something sentimental and impractical with the available data. Mostly, I told myself, don't ruin this. Because that was the loudest thought. The one that drowned out everything else when I let my guard down. Don't ruin this. 6 years. 6 years of something I hadn't known I needed until I had it, and then couldn't imagine not having. The specific ease of being known by someone. The particular safety of a friendship that had survived enough. Job changes, difficult seasons, the years when we were both figuring out who we were and not doing a great job of it, to feel permanent. I was not going to torch that. I was going to be a reasonable, mature, self-aware adult who had a feeling, acknowledged it internally, and then let it dissolve into the background the way feelings were supposed to, when you chose not to act on them. That was the plan. The plan lasted about 3 weeks. The problem was her, not in any way she intended. Elena wasn't doing anything different. She was exactly who she'd always been. But now I was seeing everything she was with this unwanted clarity, and every ordinary thing she did was feeding something I was trying very hard to starve. She called me on a Tuesday night, late, nearly 11, which was late for her, and she sounded tired, the specific tired of a long day that had asked too much, and she just wanted to talk. She said she didn't have anything particular to say. Was that okay? Was I busy? I was in bed reading. I put the book down. I'm not busy, I said. Tell me something good, she said. It was a thing we did, had done for years. One of us would be depleted and the other would say something good. Not advice, not consolation, just something good. A small thing from the day, a memory. Something that made the world feel like it contained nice things. I told her about a dog I'd seen at the coffee shop that morning. A very old golden retriever who had been carried in by his owner and placed carefully on a dog bed under the table, and had spent the entire time I was there being approached by strangers who wanted to pet him, receiving all of this attention with the dignified exhaustion of someone who had long ago made peace with being beloved. She laughed. Not a big laugh, just a soft, tired, real one. That's a good one, she said. I know. A short silence. Thank you, she said. Not for the story specifically. Just, thank you. Always, I said. And that was it. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing consequential, and then said goodnight, and that was it. I put my phone down and lay there in the dark, and felt the exact dimension and weight of everything I was keeping to myself. It was enormous. I had not fully understood, until that moment, how enormous it was. Because I kept it compartmentalized, kept it in the part of my brain I only visited late at night or early in the morning, kept it separate from the actual living I did with her, kept it under control. But underneath the control it was immense. It was taking up space. It was the reason I laughed a little too quickly sometimes when she said something that landed too close. It was the reason I drove home from every time I saw her feeling like something had been offered and not taken. It was the reason I'd been sleeping less. I was in love with my best friend. I hadn't used that word before, not even internally. I used it now, in the dark, by myself, the way you say a word out loud to see if the shape of it matches the feeling it's supposed to contain. It did. Of course it did. It matched so perfectly that I wanted to throw something. Because here's what I knew about Elena. She had a whole life. A whole, full, real life that had nothing to do with me wanting something from it. She had plans and routines, and the memory of Sophie, and a carefully maintained perimeter around the part of her that trusted people. She had her own complicated interior. She was not a problem to be solved by my feelings, and she was my best friend, and I was in love with her, and I had no idea what to do with either of those things at the same time. So I did what I'd been doing. I kept going. I showed up to lunches and phone calls and gallery openings and the unremarkable Wednesdays of a 6-year friendship. I laughed at the right moments. I said the right things. I asked about her work and remembered the details from previous conversations and texted her the articles I knew she'd find interesting. I was, from the outside, an excellent friend. From the inside, I was slowly learning the particular exhaustion of loving someone in silence, of choosing every single day the version of things where nothing changes, of performing my own ordinariness when everything about the way I felt was anything but. There was a night, early December, cold in the way Chicago gets cold when it decides to stop suggesting and start insisting, when we were sitting in her apartment, both of us on her couch with a blanket pulled over our laps, watching something neither of us was really watching. She fell asleep. Not dramatically, just gradually, the way she did, her head tipping slowly sideways, and then she was asleep against my shoulder. I could have moved. I didn't move. I sat there in the dim light of her living room with her weight warm against my shoulder, and I breathed very carefully, and I looked at the television screen without seeing it, and I thought, this is the thing I can't explain. This is why no amount of rationalization has worked. Because this, just this, feels more like home than anything I've had in years. I didn't move. I sat with her asleep on my shoulder, and I held the feeling without trying to do anything with it, without analyzing it or arguing with it or telling myself it was going to pass. I just let it be true for a few minutes, alone in the dark, where it was safe. She woke up about an hour later, disoriented and apologetic, and I said it was fine. I'd been watching the show. It was good. She didn't miss anything. She looked at me, still half asleep, face open and unguarded, and she said, "Were you okay while I was asleep?" And I said, "I was perfect." Which was true. Which was also the most honest thing I'd said to her in months. She had no way of knowing that. I drove home at midnight in the cold, and I let myself cry in the car, which was something I had not done yet. Not because I was sad, exactly. Because I was full, because carrying something that large, that carefully for that long, eventually needs somewhere to go. I let it go in the car, 15 minutes. Then I was home, and I parked, and I wiped my face, and I went upstairs. The next morning, I texted her like nothing had happened. Because nothing had happened. I made sure of that. But before we keep going, if you've made it this far, I think you know exactly why. You've felt this. Maybe not this specifically, but that thing, carrying something real and enormous right next to an ordinary Tuesday, showing up perfectly while something in you is anything but. If this story is doing something to you, hit the like button right now. It's one tap, and it means the world to me. It's how I know to keep bringing you stories like this one. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the bell notification. That way, YouTube lets you know the moment a new story goes up. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever loved someone in silence for so long that silence started to feel like the only option? Or have you been on the other side? The one who didn't know? Tell me which one. Write it for me. I read every single one. And tell me what city you're watching from. I'll heart every response. Now, Back to Claire. January. January is its own kind of test. The holidays had just passed. I'd been out of town for 2 weeks visiting family. Elena had gone to see her sister in Seattle. And when we came back to our regular lives, we were both slightly disoriented, the way you get after any interruption of normal. We'd texted while I was away. Not constantly, but reliably. A photo she'd taken of the water from her sister's apartment. A voice message I'd sent from my family's kitchen at midnight because I needed someone to talk to who wasn't them. The normal texture of us. Maintained across distance. But something had shifted while I was away. Or more accurately, something had clarified. 2 weeks without seeing her had not made it smaller. I'd hoped it would. I'd hoped the physical distance would give me perspective, would let the feeling settle back into the background where I'd been managing it. Instead, I came back, and she texted me the day I landed. "You back? I want to hear everything about the trip. I have things to tell you. Can we do dinner this week?" And I sat in the back of my car reading the message, and felt the exact same thing I'd felt every day for the past 3 months, with the same intensity, without diminishment. Okay, I thought. Okay, so it's not going anywhere. Now what? I went to dinner. Of course I went to dinner. She was exactly herself. That was always the thing. She was always exactly herself. And I had come to understand that this was the specific thing I couldn't do anything about. Because she wasn't performing anything. There was nothing exaggerated or constructed to eventually see through. She just was who she was. And she talked about her sister's new apartment, and a frustrating project at work, and a documentary she'd watched on the plane that she was still thinking about days later. I listened. I watched her hands. At one point she said something about the new year, about how she was thinking about what she actually wanted. Not in a resolution way, but in a more fundamental way. Like something had shifted while she was away, and she was still trying to understand the shape of it. I said that made sense. She looked at me. "Did that happen to you too? On the trip?" "Something like that," I said. She waited. She had this way of waiting, patient, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world for whatever came next, that I had always found both comforting and now excruciating. I said, "I think I've been not thinking about something for a while." "What does not thinking about something look like for you?" "Like thinking about it constantly," I said. She smiled. Slow. Understanding something without me saying what. "Yeah," she said. "I know that one." We let it sit there. Both of us looking at our food, at our wine glasses, at the middle distance. The restaurant humming around us. I thought, this is the moment. This is exactly the moment. If there is ever going to be a moment, this is it. And you are letting it pass. I let it pass. But something had changed. And I think we both knew it. The conversation had let a sliver of light through something that had been closed. And even though neither of us had done anything with it, the sliver was there. We both knew the sliver was there. We walked to my car after. The night was cold and clear. The specific dry cold of a Chicago January that crackles when you breathe, and our footsteps were loud on the sidewalk. At my car, she stopped. She turned to face me. And she did something she had never done before. She reached out and tucked my scarf up around my neck, the way you do when someone's collar is down in the cold. This small maternal no, not maternal, something else. Something closer than maternal. This small gesture that took exactly 2 seconds and cost nothing and meant nothing to anyone watching and landed on me like an entire conversation. She fixed my scarf, and then she looked at me, hands still for a moment at the edge of the fabric, close enough that I could see her breath in the cold air, and she said, "Claire." Just my name. The same way she'd said it in the doorway in October. I didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that would have fit in a parking lot on a January night, with my whole chest rearranging itself around the fact of her standing that close. "I know something's been different," she said. I'm not pushing. I just want you to know that I notice things. I always notice things. And whatever it is, it's okay." She dropped her hands, stepped back, looked at me with those amber eyes like she was both giving me something and setting it down where I could pick it up in my own time. "Drive safe," she said, got in her car, left. I stood on the sidewalk for probably 45 seconds. Just stood there, with my hand on my car door and my heart somewhere outside my body, and the cold pressing in from all sides. She knows. The thought was electric. Terror and relief running through the exact same wire. She knew. She had known, probably for longer than I had. And she wasn't running from it. She wasn't pretending it wasn't there. She was holding a space open. Patient. On her own timeline. Whatever it is, it's okay. I drove home. I did not cry this time. I was too full of something that didn't have a name yet, but was taking up the space where all the wrong names used to live. I sat in my car in my parking garage for a long time, and then I went upstairs. And I found her mug, the white mug with the chip on the handle, still in my cabinet from the last time she'd come over. And I ran my thumb along the chip and thought about October mornings and amber eyes and someone saying my name like it meant something. And I thought about 6 years in a couch in December and a parking lot in January and all the small, accumulating evidence of something I had spent months trying not to call by its real name. I put the mug on my counter, where I would see it in the morning. It was a Sunday in February when things became what they were going to be. Nothing planned about it. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the things that seem important don't arrive with announcements. They arrive on ordinary Sundays when you're wearing old socks and you haven't washed your hair. She came over to my apartment. We'd been doing that more lately. After January, after the parking lot, there was a new quality to our time together. Still easy, still warm, still very much us, but with the sliver of light fully present now, acknowledged in the air between us even when we weren't talking about it. She brought pastries from the bakery near her apartment. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, which was becoming, I realized, a significant piece of furniture in the story of us. We talked for a long time, about nothing consequential, about everything. At some point, the conversation slowed. Not because we'd run out of things to say. We never ran out of things to say. But because some conversations eventually don't need words anymore. They just need the space to be themselves. She had both hands wrapped around her mug, the white one with the chip that I'd left on the counter. She noticed. I saw her notice, the small pause, the way her fingers moved over the chip on the handle. And she looked up at me with an expression I didn't have a word for. Something between recognition and tenderness. Something that looked like, oh, you kept this, you put this out, where you'd see it. She didn't say anything about it. She looked at me. I looked back. And then she set the mug down on the table between us, carefully, like she was placing something important somewhere it could be seen clearly by both of us. I said, "I think I've been in love with you for a long time." I had practiced that sentence exactly 0 times. It came out plainly, without ceremony, the way the truest things do. Not because I'd chosen that moment, but because the moment had chosen me. Because it was exactly the right Sunday morning. Because she was holding her chipped mug and looking at me like she already knew, and I simply could not keep it in my chest for one more second. She didn't move. She looked at me with both hands still wrapped around the mug, and I watched her face. Watched it carefully, the way I had learned to watch her face over 6 years of breakfasts and late nights, and all the ordinary and not ordinary spaces between us. And something in it opened. Not changed. Opened, like a door that had always been there, only ever waiting for someone to try the handle. She nodded. Once. Slowly. "I know," she said. She reached across the table. Put her hand on mine. Just that. Just her hand on mine. Her thumb against my knuckle. The warmth of her palm against the back of my hand. And didn't move it. We sat there. In my kitchen. On a February Sunday. With cold coffee going cold in our mugs and pastries half-eaten on the table, and the city making its Sunday sounds outside and no sound at all inside except for us breathing the same air. "I've been waiting," she said quietly. "I didn't want to push you." "I know," I said. "And I didn't know if—" "I know," I said again. She squeezed my hand. I turned my hand over and held hers. That was it. That was the entirety of it. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic scene. No tears. Though later, much later, after she'd gone home and I was washing the mugs, I did stand at the sink for a long moment, with my hands under warm water, feeling something I hadn't felt in so long I'd forgotten it was missing. Not joy, exactly. Steadier than joy. Wholeness, maybe. Like a word you've been trying to remember all morning and then it just comes to you while you're doing something else. We ate the rest of the pastries. We made a second pot of coffee. We stayed at that kitchen table for 2 more hours, talking the way we always talked, and also differently, in the particular way of people who have said the thing they needed to say and can now say everything else with their whole selves present. At one point, she picked up the white mug, the one with the chip, and wrapped both hands around it the way she had from the beginning. And she looked at me over the rim with those amber eyes, warm and entirely unguarded, and she smiled. Not the polite version, not the social version, the real one. "Good coffee," she said. "Same as always," I said. "No," she said. "Better. That mug is still on my counter, not because I forgot to put it away, because I stopped wanting to. There are things you hold on to not for what they are, but for what they were holding while you figured yourself out. A cracked mug. A February morning. The first time you said something true out loud and the person across the table already knew. And waited anyway. Waited for you. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't the declaration. Sometimes it's the quiet. The patience. The way 2 people can sit across from each other for months, holding something enormous between them, choosing every day to preserve it until the moment arrives, when preserving it means finally setting it down and letting it be seen. If this story held something for you, if you found some piece of yourself in the silence, or in the waiting, or in that one small Sunday morning when everything became what it was going to be, write quiet in the comments. That's how I know you made it here with me. And if you want more stories like this one, about the ordinary mornings that turn out not to be ordinary at all, click the video coming up on your screen right now. Thank you for being here. A big kiss, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.